BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays this year, I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. My name is Black Box Ned, and I am your host. In this episode, I will be discussing Isaac Kozebrodski as a Jack the Ripper suspect, and I want to be clear about something. If you do any additional reading about him, or if you do some Google searches, you will most likely see his name spelled in different ways, but there is a very high chance that it's all talking about the same person. Last week on the channel, I did an episode about Charles Lechmere as a Jack the Ripper suspect, and Charles Lechmere mostly becomes a suspect because he is the person who found the body of Polly Nichols, the first confirmed victim of the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who operated in England in 1888, and whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. On August 31st of 1888, we had the murder of Polly Nichols, and her body was discovered, first by Charles Lechmere, and then second by Robert Pohl. Then on September 8th of 1888, we had the murder of Annie Chapman, and on September 30th of 1888 there is the double event, and this is where Isaac Kozebrodski is going to be introduced. Liz Stride was the first victim who was murdered on September 30th of 1888, and the second one was Catherine Eddowes. Then we're going all the way to November 9th of 1888 with the murder of Mary Kelly. And, I was talking about Charles Lechmere as a Ripper suspect last week, and I even watched an interview that was done with Christer Holmgren and Edward Stowe, and this was aired on the House of Lechmere channel. Both Holmgren and Stowe believed that Charles Lechmere was Jack the Ripper, but they talked about how there is also another suspect that gets incorporated into the mix, and his name is George Hutchinson, for very similar reasons. One criticism of these theories involving Charles Lechmere as the Jack the Ripper suspect is that, well, no, wait a second, just because he has a connection to the crime scene, other Jack the Ripper suspects have connections to the crime scenes, and one notable one is George Hutchinson. He is a witness who saw a man walking with Mary Kelly prior to her murder on November 9th of 1888. And then some people just think that that story is bogus, and that George Hutchinson made the whole thing up because he was Jack the Ripper himself. And even when I was reading John J. Edelston's Jack the Ripper, an encyclopedia, Edelston spoke very highly of George Hutchinson as a Jack the Ripper suspect. He actually gave him the highest suspect rating out of any of the other suspects that were discussed in the book. So people are taking the theory involving George Hutchinson seriously. And the motivation for this episode is that I wanted to point out that there are other suspects that incorporated for this same reason, and one of them is Isaac Kozebrodski. Now, as we're going to see, Isaac Kozebrodski most likely was not Jack the Ripper by himself. He gets incorporated into this set of theories because of his connections to the scene on Berner Street near the murder of Liz Stride. And in fact, if you just put Isaac Kozebrodski into Google, one of the first sources that you'll find is that he was a witness after Liz Stride was murdered. He saw the dead body of Liz Stride, the third confirmed victim of Jack the Ripper. And before I say anything further, I would like to remind you guys that you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. You can also drop a comment down below. If you have something to say about Jack the Ripper for larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And feel free to visit the suspect playlist about the Jack the Ripper suspects, as well as the new playlist that's been created for the Whitechapel murders here on Black Box Online Radio. But there are two sets of observations that I want to look at for this episode. The first is coming to us from Randy Williams, who wrote the book Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, and he believes that there were multiple killers involved with the Jack the Ripper murders. Not just the Whitechapel murders, but the ones that I listed off at the beginning that have been attributed to Jack the Ripper. He believes that there were multiple killers, and one of the killers was Isaac Kozebrodski, and I would like to talk about his observations. And then I would like to talk about a different way that Isaac Kozebrodski could be incorporated into this mystery. So firstly, what happened on September 30th of 1888? Liz Stride is attacked by somebody, and the attack may have occurred around 12:56 or 12:58 a.m. Originally, they thought that the attack occurred earlier, but by going through some of the medical reports, they determined that the medical examiner's report determined that it most likely occurred around 12:56 or 12:58 a.m. At 1 a.m. on September 30th, Louis Diemschutz is riding his horse and cart down the street, and he sees something in the road, and he gets off because his horse is bothered. It's the horse that's what triggers him to look down in the street, and the horse is shying at something. And he sees what appears to be the outline of a woman, and he thinks that the woman could be his wife. And Louis Diemschutz was a member of the International Workmen's Education Club, and that's actually where he was going, as was Isaac Kozebrodski. And then he walked into the club, and it turned out that his wife was actually sitting in the kitchen. So then he walked back out, lit a match, or somebody lit a match, and the wind blew it out rather quickly, but they saw that there was actually the body of a woman in the street, and this woman was Liz Stride. Now, what conventional ripperologists would say is that, okay, Jack the Ripper heard Louis Diemschutz coming with his horse and cart, so he ran, and he hid in the shadows. He killed Liz Stride very quickly, then he hid in the shadows, when Louis Diemschutz went into the club, that's when the Ripper escaped. But, first and foremost, there are a couple reasons why this story is very sketchy. There are reasons why people would be skeptical of Louis Diemschutz's story. And I even did an episode of Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, which is hosted by Jerome Hulot, and I was a guest on that program talking about Jack the Ripper. And we were both thinking, wow, that is so odd that he saw a woman in the street and he thought that the woman could have been his wife, so he went into the club to see who it was. Wouldn't you examine the body first, and then just try to find out who it is, as opposed to going into the club first? But the more important thing, the observation that's been made by Randy Williams, is that he says that he works with horses. He worked on a horse farm in Pennsylvania. He's an American like me, following the Jack the Ripper case, and he said that horses do not shy at the scent of blood, that their sense of smell really isn't too different than the sense of smell compared to a human, and furthermore, the horses in London, especially in Whitechapel, would have been walking past all types of meat markets and butcher shops, and they even had horse meat that was for sale at some of the other butcher shops and meat markets. So anytime a horse would go past a butcher shop or a cart that had meat on it, would the horse shy at the scent of blood? That also didn't seem very plausible to him, so there are big reasons why he thought that Louis Diemschutz was lying and that he was making this up. And to Randy Williams's credit, he has done the research, he has composed a very interesting and elaborate theory, but by his own admission, the suspect whom he believes did the majority of the ripping in the Jack the Ripper murders was Isaac Kozebrodski, and this is the core element that I want to share with you guys about the murder of Liz Stride, and this is the focus of today's episode. Is it not possible that Isaac Kozebrodski committed the murder of Liz Stride and Louis Diemschutz covered for him? The suspicious thing about not examining the body first, the suspicious thing about the horse shying at the scent of blood, the whole reason why the horse didn't stay in place was because it smelled something that was bothering it. And then, as I said, there would be multiple killers in Randy Williams' theory, and he thinks that Isaac Kozebrodski committed the murder of Liz Stride. Then he went into the workmen's club, went into the kitchen to wait with Louis Diemschutz's wife and another man named Samuel Friedman. And then Samuel Friedman is the one that went to Mitre Square to murder Catherine Eddowes. And this was not only about having multiple killers in multiple places. He believes that they did this because it was creating a diversion, that the policemen would be notified, they would start blowing their whistles, and then they would be rushing toward the scene of the Stride murder, leaving Mitre Square mostly unguarded. And there are some much larger things that are incorporated into Randy Williams' theory. He even goes to the point of saying that Jack the Ripper was an identity that was created by the Russian anarchist named Peter Kropotkin, and Peter Kropotkin directed Louis Diemschutz to carry out this plan. Diemschutz was more or less the manager of the Jack the Ripper murders, and Isaac Kozebrodski did the majority of the killing, as well as Samuel Friedman committing the murder of Catherine Eddowes. but I want to provide a little bit of extra information about Isaac Kozebrodski, and I also want to look at a new theory involving him that isn't so conspiratorial. Firstly, there's a page about Isaac Kozebrodski over on jacktheripper.org, which I would like to read for you now. He saw Elizabeth Stride's body. Member of the International Workmen's Educational Club. Isaac Kozebrodski was one of the first people to attend the scene of the murder of Liz Stride. He was present at the International Workmen's Educational Club when Louis Dean Schutz came in to notify other members that he had found a body in the yard. Kozebrodski was the first person accompanying Dean Schutz back out into the yard. The Western Times reported what happened on Monday, October 1st of 1888. Dean Schutz entered the club by the side door higher up and informed those in the concert room upstairs that he had seen something in the yard. A member of the club named Isaac Kozebrodski, but familiarly known as Isaacs, returned with Dean Schutz into the court, and they struck a match, and the match went out in the wind quickly, and it was once apparent that the woman was dead, the body was still warm, and the clothes enveloping it were wet from the recent rain. But the heart had ceased beating, and the stream of blood in the gutter terminating in a hideous pool. I guess we should say there was a stream of blood in the gutter that was terminating in a hideous pool, and it showed, but not too plainly, what happened. Both men ran off without delay to find policemen. And Isaac Kozebrodski would go on to be arrested in 1889 for some other events involving the educational club, including starting a riot. And the theory that has been promulgated by Randy Williams is that the reason why the murders took place is the Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin wanted to change modern culture because they viewed prostitution as something that was an insult to freedom, and they thought that the needy can never be free, and the only reason why people are going into prostitution is because they are in financial need, and they wanted to scare all the women of England into doing something else with their lives, and in short, trying to change modern culture, but doing it very discreetly. And that's why the Jack the Ripper persona was created. And this was also organized by Russian Jewish anarchists who appeared to be very, very much just against the concept of both Western and Eastern religions. And one of the pieces of evidence that is put forward by Randy Williams is that Samuel Friedman would have gone to Mitre Square to murder Catherine Eddowes, and the mitre is the type of hat that is worn by the Pope, because everything is just slowly making a mockery of Christianity, as well as just both sides of Christianity, the Eastern Church and the more Western forms such as Catholicism and Protestantism. But as we're going to see, I think one of the stronger pieces of evidence that is put forward by Randy Williams relates to the mockeries of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and this is over on a website called crimetraveler.org. The clinical version of the theory was going to be put in a book called The Theotokos Murders, Jack the Ripper's Terror of London. But of course, the book that was put out by Randy Williams is Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror. But when the doctors and I discussed the best way to present our theory to the public, we tossed around a number of ideas. Okay, though, so as far as the Theotokos murders, the Theotokos are holy nights in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and Randy Williams would say that there are certain dates in the world of Jack the Ripper when the crimes were committed, and most notably September 8th of 1888 is one of the nights of the Holy Theotokos. Specifically, that is a feast of the Holy Theotokos, Theotokos meaning Mother of God, and September 30th of 1888 is the night of the Most Holy Theotokos. So again, this is all just making a mockery of Christianity, but I will keep reading. Firstly, we weren't trying to compete with or somehow outdo the great works that have already been produced by people such as Richard Jones and Donald Rumbelow, whose research we greatly admire. As you and your readers well know, the story has been done in many ways, but not exactly like this that I know of. In fact, Sherlock Holmes, who is featured in Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, has been called in to tackle the case in a number of books, movies, and short stories, but never to my knowledge with an eye to presenting a real detective and a team of world-famous criminalists who actually review the facts of the case. And what I think he's trying to say is that his book, Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, is a blend of storytelling with creative nonfiction, because he did talk to real medical experts and scientists for the creation of that book. And this is actually a question that is written out by Crime Traveler when it says, This is the first credible theory that I have heard involving the Jack the Ripper murders being carried out by multiple individuals. Are you aware of other theories suggesting multiple killers? And Randy Williams says, I have heard the idea suggested before, but never with any specific names attached, and certainly never any of the men that I am now positive were the Rippers. Back then, Louis Deemschutz, who was 26 years old at the time, and then Isaac Kozebrodski was only 17 years old at the time, and Samuel Friedman was 41 years old, who I believe to be the enforcer of the group, whom I believe also stood guard at the Elizabeth Stride slaying and assisted in the Catherine Eddowes murder, while Deemschutz was putting it on thick for the police a half-mile away, where he was pretending to be frightened and rattled to the core after supposedly finding the body of Long Liz Stride inside the gateway of the men's club where he was the steward. Now, I told you guys in this episode that I wanted to explore a different avenue. I wanted to explore a different aspect of this particular theory because when I first started doing the Ripper Wednesday segment, I was really captivated by a certain aspect of these observations, way more so than this thing about, all right, you have these three killers and they are working and operating because of orders from a Russian anarchist. Instead, I was more pulled in by his observations about how and why Louis Deemschutz may have lied. Number one, about the horse shying at the scent of blood, and number two, about seeing the woman in the street thinking that it's wife, so he goes inside and then comes back outside. Those things sounded really bizarre to me. And perhaps a simpler explanation is that he committed, that Isaac Kozebrodski committed the murder of Liz Stride, and that Louis Deemschutz lied and covered up for him because he was a member of the Workmen's Club. But I'm going to be kind of going into some different territory, if you will. Those of you who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery know that for a very long time, I was the person who said that, hey, it looks like there are multiple killers, but I'm not completely certain. And I began to notice that that type of thinking was going over into my observations about Jack the Ripper. I cannot downplay this enough. For years, I made these observations about the Zodiac Killer case, about how, all right, there's a lot of evidence that indicates that there were multiple killers, but, I'm not completely convinced. And when I first started doing this segment for you guys, Ripper Wednesday, I was looking at the story of Isaac Kozebrodski, and I was thinking, wow, this makes so much sense. This makes so much sense about how this individual, this 17-year-old, committed the murder of Liz Stride, but not the other murders. Now, does that mean that the entire full package theory of Randy Williams is correct? No. But that aspect of it, I even told some people, I think this guy, Williams, he's cracked the murder of Liz Stride. And there's another reason for that, and that is that Liz Stride is the only victim who was not extensively mutilated, and the explanation is that, well, the Ripper heard Louis Deemschutz coming, so he killed her quickly, and then hid in the shadows, and then ran away. How many times are we going to hear that explanation, that there is just this person X, this unknown man, who is just hiding in the shadows and sneaking away before he is seen by other people? That becomes a foundational point in the theory that with Charles Lechmere that, okay, maybe he didn't kill Polly Nichols. There was just a man who was running away really quickly and hid in the shadows. With the murder of Annie Chapman, I don't necessarily think that that's the case, because we have a witness named Albert Kadash who went out into his yard and he heard something that sounded like a thump against a fence near Hanbury Street, and someone may have even said the word no, and what he was listening to might have actually been Jack the Ripper pushing Annie Chapman's body against a fence. That one is different, but then with the murder of Liz Stride, you just have the person X, the unknown man, running into the shadows, hiding into the shadows, and running away undetected. With Mitre Square even, there's a more bizarre aspect of this, because there is someone who would have committed the murder and then run into the shadows multiple times. Then, of course, with the murder of Mary Kelly, there was more time accounted for because Mary Kelly was murdered indoors. So I just began to think that this is almost too convenient of an explanation, and I wanted to look at this from the possibilities that were discussed at the beginning. Who is actually at the crime scenes? Yeah, you can say something like, well, Edgar Degas, the French artist, took a train from Paris to London, and he did that because he was Jack the Ripper, and I mean, I don't even think that that should be widely entertained when you have somebody like any of the previously mentioned suspects that I've talked about who are directly at the crime scenes. So that's a point for Isaac Kozebrodski committing the murder of Liz Stride, but you might have noticed that the only serious points that I've talked about have been involving Isaac Kozebrodski and the murder of Liz Stride, and when I was formulating the theory in my own mind, that's all I would have accused him of. That's all I would have just said, that it was coincidental that Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on the same night, and that somebody wrote a letter taking credit for it. But Liz Stride is also murdered south of Whitechapel Road, whereas Catherine Eddowes was murdered above Whitechapel Road, and all the other victims are. Liz Stride is the only victim that was murdered south of Whitechapel Road. And as I said, I used to think about that stuff in the past. But here is some counterbalance. What if there was just a man who was hiding in the shadows? All the evidence can be explained by a single perpetrator without using Isaac Kozebrodski as the murderer of Liz Stride. What if all of these observations about the Ripper killing Liz Stride, he hears a noise, he hides in the shadows, and then Louis Deemschutz walks into the club. The Ripper uses that as the opportunity to run away and go to Mitre Square. What if that's what happened? And, Louis Deemschutz didn't necessarily know that Jack the Ripper would have been hiding in the shadows there. Now, about the horse shying from the scent of blood, I actually contacted a couple of places. Like, I follow these horse farms that are on Facebook, and they just post a photo of their horses. They have Instagram pages, too. And I just asked them what they thought about this, that a horse cannot shy at the scent of blood. Neither one of them had any real response. They actually suggested that I contact an equine scientist, which is what I'll do in the future. But I do think that there are some suspicious things that are going on. But what if that's what the horse actually did? What if the horse got bothered by something, and then Deemschutz is looking around and he sees a woman, and even if you think that that's really weird behavior, that he would go into the club to look for his wife as opposed to examining the body first, what's my favorite saying? Being weird is not a crime. That doesn't necessarily mean that he had anything to do with the murder or the cover-up. And this is just how the Ripper operated, is that he was paying attention. If he heard something, he would run away and hide, and he would sneak around the back alleys and the streets of Whitechapel. But what do you guys think? And I also want to be very clear about something. Just because you can look at a true crime case, an unsolved mystery, and you can arrange the ideas in a way that makes sense to you, that doesn't mean that's what actually happened. That's just your perception of the situation. And I also am fully able to admit that I'm wrong and that I've been wrong in the past. And I'm not selling you anything about Jack the Ripper, so I think it's a little bit easier to do it that way for the following reason. When I did my first episode on the murder of Liz Stride, I said flat out, I think there's a 10% chance that she was murdered by Jack the Ripper. She wasn't mutilated, she's in a different location, and it just seemed like a different crime altogether. And there's also some disinfo out there that there was a different type of knife used, that there was a shorter round knife that was used for the Stride murder compared to the other murders that were committed all with the same knife. That doesn't appear to be certifiable, but I had a big reversal on that. I went from being 10% certain and 90% uncertain to an absolute shift and saying that I was now 90% certain that she was murdered by the same killer, and 10% chance that it was somebody else. So that means highly, highly unlikely that I would lean toward Isaac Kozebrodski to this day. And furthermore, I don't think the Ripper would have cared at all that her body was south of Whitechapel Road. And when you look at the layout of Whitechapel, I think that it is just done purely for convenience. I think the Ripper was operating for convenience. I don't think there was any specific desire to commit murders north of Whitechapel Road, or to the east, or to the west, or to the south. I just absolutely don't see that. Now, as far as these theories that someone was trying to make the shape of a pentagram or a cross, I will always hear them out because some of them might be defendable. And as I said, Even though I'm skeptical about it, it doesn't mean I'm completely right that the Ripper wasn't trying to do that. But I think that the Ripper was operating for convenience. And furthermore, everything can be explained by a single perpetrator. So in the past, I used to think that Isaac Kozebrodski was a very strong suspect for the murder of Liz Stride, but I had a big reversal on that, and I just start to lean more and more toward a single perpetrator. But answer that challenge question, is there another widely discussed theory out there that involves multiple killers? Certainly. That was a challenge question from Crime Traveler, and I was just recently talking to you guys about the book The Bell Tower, which accuses two different suspects of being Jack the Ripper, Gibson and Gibson, John Gibson and Jesse Gibson. Although they are not related, they just share the same last name. That's just the first one that comes to mind, and you guys can throw some more in the comment section down below. Who do you think Jack the Ripper was? And even more importantly, can you name a theory involving multiple killers that has been widely discussed? I would love to read your comments. And that will be all for me now. You can follow the show on Facebook under the page Black Box Online Radio. I also have TikTok and Instagram, BlackBoxNed88 on those pages. And the email address is blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I will see you over on Instagram for some shorts and reels, as well as on Friday to talk about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.